Hi guys, sorry I can't be there today. We're just gonna have a quick conversation as we start our next unit, which is about scatterplots. All right, so today we are just going to talk about what associations are and what scatterplots are. So to kind of get us started, we have this problem to kind of open us up. So it says Susie went to the mall and surveyed shoppers to see how many items they had purchased and the total amount of money they had spent on the mall. She created a scatter plot to represent the data she found. So if we were together, we would have us write on the whiteboard, but I'm just going to answer this via Edpuzzle. So the first question is how many shoppers did Susie survey? So based off of this picture, it kind of looks like each of these dots would represent a person. So if I just count the dots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, I would have 16 shoppers that she surveyed. Okay. Next question is based on the representation, what is your interpretation of the data? AKA, does one variable seem to have effect on the other? All right, well, I kind of noticed that these dots seem to go up in a positive upward pattern. So to me, it kind of seems that the more items someone bought, the more money that they spent. So that's kind of the interpretation I had. More items, more money. And that makes sense because usually when you buy more things, it's more expensive. So the last thing is I want you guys to think about, why do you guys think that this would be an example of a scatter plot? All right, so when I see the word scatterplot, I just kind of think of scatter and I think of all over the place. And so a good example would just be, a bunch of data points that are scattered amongst a grid. All right, so now we're actually going to talk about what a scatter plot is. So a scatter plot is just showing a bunch of data, and it's numerical data, which just means we're comparing a set of numbers to another set of numbers. And then we're just hoping to see, is there a relationship where one has an effect on the other, looking for trends, patterns, and associations, basically just relationships. All right, so with scatter plots, we have three different types of associations, or we can also call them correlations. So this also kind of relates to slope because we kind of see a positive pattern, a negative pattern, and then we also have a no pattern at all. So our first relationship is a positive association. And when I look at this, I can see a positive association just because I kind of see a positive slope. Okay? This says as one variable increases, the other variable also increases. Okay? It also says the variables are changing in the same direction, which is very important. Okay, then we have a negative association, and that's also considered just kind of like slope going downwards. This is an example as one variable increases, this goes to the right, the other variable is going down or decreasing. And it also says something important. It says variables change in opposite directions. Okay. And then finally, we have relationships that have no relationship at all. So we would have say they have no association. And it says the change in one variable has no effect on the other. So we have positive, negative, and we have no association. So now we're just going to kind of look at different types of relationships and see if we can figure out if it would have a positive, a negative, or no association at all. All right, so our first example is the number of shoes a person owns and the number of states they have visited. And that kind of sounds really silly just to say it out loud. So we probably would assume there's not really a big relationship. But the way I kind of work through this problem is I say the first thing. So as the number of shoes a person owns increases, the number of states the person has visited, that makes no sense at all. So it shouldn't increase or decrease. It kind of doesn't have an effect on either. So there should be no association. Okay. The next one is the number of days since watering a plant and the moisture level in the soil. So again, just to kind of help me figure this out, I always have the first thing increase. So as the number of days since watering a plant has increased, the moisture level in soil, if I don't water anything, the moisture usually goes down. So these are opposites. So it should have a negative relationship, a negative association. Okay. Finally, the size in the ounce of a steak and the cost of a steak. So usually the bigger the size of a steak, usually the cost is also bigger and larger. These are the same positives, so it should have a positive association. All right, so now I'm going to have you guys try these three. So first, the altitude of a hiker and the total oxygen level in the air. All right, so the altitude of a hiker, which means someone's going up a mountain. So the higher someone gets on up a mountain, the total oxygen in the air, the more you go up a mountain, the less oxygen there is. So it should be less. So a positive and a negative would make a negative association. All right. The temperature outside and the total gallons of gas sold at a gas station. So as the temperature outside increases, the total number of gallons sold at a gas station, I mean, it could have a little bit of relationship, but for the most part, it doesn't really impact another, so there would be no association. And then finally, the size of a home and the cost of monthly utilities for the home. All right, so for this one, the size of a house, as the size of a house gets bigger, the cost of utilities usually has to cost more as well, our heating or cooling. So this would be a positive association. All right, so now we just have two more questions. So we're just going to kind of think about this question. Is Brian correct? Mrs. Gomez's class did a survey about the number of chores students did and the amount of allowance that students earned. Brian thinks the association is negative because they found that as the number of chores decreased, the amount of allowance also decreased. I want you guys to think if Brian is correct or not and explain. Okay, so when I kind of look at this, it kind of tells me what direction to go. So it says as the number of chores decreases, the amount of an allowance also decreases. Well, these are two negatives, and two negatives go to a positive usually. And so this actually is a positive association. So Brian is not correct. And sometimes how I do this is I always start in the positive. So I usually think about it as the number of chores increase, the amount of allowances usually increase. And that also shows me that positive association. This is a very common mistake. Sometimes a person just sees a negative and they automatically think it's negative, but it's basically the relationship between the two. A negative and a negative would result in a positive relationship. All right, and then finally, we have one last question. We have a scatter plot with no real story. And the question is which would not likely be a variable to represent this scatter plot? So I want you guys to read through A, B, C, and D and select the choice that you guys think would not represent this scatter plot. All right, so we have the number of miles driven and the gallons of gas used. The more miles, the more gallons. So it looks like A would represent it since it's positive. The number of students in a school, the more students, the number of unused lockers. Well, usually there's less unused lockers. So this looks like this should have a negative relationship. This one does not have a negative relationship. So this answer should be B. Just to check, let's check all the other ones. The number of items ordered at a restaurant and the cost of a bill. The more items, usually the more cost, so that shows a positive. And then the number of customers in a store and the wait at a register. More customers, sometimes we have a longer wait. So it looks like B is the correct answer. That is the one that probably would not be related to one another. So today we just have a Google form. It's 10 questions where it has situations just like what we talked about, and you will say positive, negative, 0.